Hello, and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show barely passing for presentable. I'm Christy Powell. My co-host tonight is a little of this and just a lot of that. Welcome, Nate Smith.
Hey, Christy.
And our guest tonight is an agent with Recovering from Religion and fellow sex advocate. Welcome, Helen Greene.
Hello!
Tonight, it is batter up for both teams. So give Coach Christy and the gang a call at 512-991-9242 or on the internets at tiny.cc/callsex. The show is starting right now, so play ball.
All right. Well, we're not really in the habit of asking our guests to just lay out all of their adjectives, but for the purposes of this conversation, I think it would be useful to acknowledge our own identities here. I'll start by saying that even though I see myself as being poly and somewhat pan or at least hetero-flexible, I'm currently in a monogamous relationship with a woman with no intentions of changing that, even to scratch my occasional itch for fellatio. So, Helen and Nate, how does your identity match your world?
So, there you go. So, I'm bisexual with some pan tendencies. But just like you, Christy, I'm in a heteronormative relationship that's pretty monogamous for the most part. And but it's one of those things that the body wants what the body wants, even though you're in that relationship. So that's how I roll.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
Nate, how about you, boss?
I waffle between the labels of bi and gay, but it's usually just dependent on the company I'm with. So if I'm with if I'm with a bunch of hetero people, or if I'm at work, I work in construction and trades, I'll usually just say gay so that I don't have to explain the various ins and outs of human sexuality to them. But I am bi. I've been with men and women. I'm just married to a man now, so gay's easier.
Yeah, no, I hear that.
Yeah.
What are some of the assumptions that people make about you because of the, big eye roll and air quotes for the podcast audience, for the lifestyle that you lead?
Well, I know for myself that it's one of those things that I get to kind of move in that straight space a lot of the time because all my friends know I'm bi, and they're really accepting and loving, wonderful people. A couple of my family members know, but for the most part, they don't. And as far as, my workspace, social life and stuff, it doesn't really come up because, as soon as you say, my husband or, my boyfriend, or, if you're on the, if you're male and you say girlfriend or wife or something like that, the questions just stop. They're just like, okay. So,
Right.
you kind of can move in those spaces a little bit easier because, straight is usually, it shouldn't be, but it's usually the default, Yeah,
no, I hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get a lot of drop jaws when people find out that I'm with a man, just because I don't really present, as what straight people might think of as a gay man. And I have hobbies that don't really align with what people think of when they think of gay culture. I go to the range. I'm an outdoors person, I work in construction, stuff like that. So when people find out, I don't make it a point to announce it to everyone, but when people find it, really, you are, and I'm like, yeah, we're, we don't all wear short shorts, and it's not all this stereotypical mumbo jumbo. I'm not a Britney Spears fan, but I am a Lady Gaga fan.
Okay, fair. Well, I mean, that's just human.
We can accept
that's just
you.
Human.
Thank you.
You get your gay cred. You get your gay cred now.
Yeah, no, Nate, I feel like I'm almost in an opposite situation. Doing this show, just dressing the way that I do, and these other things. I think people assume that I am living a much more queer life than the one I actually am. Like when they meet my partner, you know, back when the Free Thought Library was open and I would come in and introduce her, I think a lot of people were a little bit surprised. And it can be honestly even a little bit awkward because of the work that I do when I work with the queer community and I am a member of the queer community and I'm an advocate for the queer community. And then people come into my therapy office or my digital therapy office, and I'll tell a personal story and start throwing around like her and she, and people get a little bit caught off guard by that. It can be really awkward wanting to be like authentic and let people know your adjectives, let people know who you are and let people know about your life without having to like just correct every little thing that people assume.
That is exactly the opposite of what I usually get, because if I'll be, you know, talking at work with somebody I barely know, and I'll be like, oh, is that, you know, is that your girlfriend, or what are you having for dinner? I'll be like, yeah, he's making dinner tonight. And they're like, wait, he? I'm like, yeah, he. Like, you're gay? I'm like, yes, I am. And again, that gets back to what I was saying earlier, is I don't really go out of my way to correct people, because, you know, I'm there to work. I'm not there to be their sex counselor.
Sure.
You know, so
Right.
I just usually like, yeah, sure, whatever. You call it what you want.
Well, what are some of the other ways that you don't like fit in to the role that people ascribe to you, or that they assume is your identity?
This is something that like I've been, especially over the past, I want to say a few years, that I've given a lot of thought about, is especially since there's so much more exposure to gay culture and queer culture and stuff like that, like, you know, when you're kind of operate, like I call it like performing straight,
Mm-hmm.
you know, people will just go, oh, you know, that's a straight person, you know, but that's not my identity. That's not who I am. And that can be a little bit frustrating, because a part of me really wants to be like, you know, I am bisexual, I'm cis, and I present very cis, you know, but that's not who I am. And it doesn't really give a full picture of the type of person that you are. So, you know, it can get a little bit frustrating when you want to be a little bit more open, you know, like you were saying, Christy, you know, like you feel that, you know, how you present and how people perceive you, you know, isn't completely who you are as a person, you know. And then on the other side, if you know, when I'm in like queer spaces and stuff like that, you know, and, you know, I'm talking about, you know, my sexuality and things that, you know, that are a part of my life, it's a little easier, you know, than with the straights, you know, because they're like, oh, okay, well, you're bi, and that's awesome. And you can be a little bit more open. You can be a little bit more explicit and talking about your desires and types of relationships you've had and stuff like that. So it's that very weird dichotomy, you know, you're going kind of back and forth with it, you know, and it's a kind of a weird sort of place to be sometimes, you know, when you have this, you know, bi or pansexual drive, you know, and trying to figure out your space there, and, you know, how you want to present and what information you want to share with people.
Yeah, that's a really awkward piece of all of this. Just the simple fact that, for better or for worse, the queer community tends to be a lot more sex positive, a lot more sex literate. And so when you're in queer spaces, there's, you know, also pushback, and there's a potential for exclusion in those different ways, but if you're too straight presenting. But
yeah,
overall, it's easier in so many ways to choose to pass, and we'll get into that whole concept and some of the real flaws in the notion of passing, but I guess I'm curious how both of you code in these different places. I mean, we've talked a little bit about, you know, the contrast between Nate and I and those kinds of things, but what do your friends know about you? What do your acquaintances, or what do strangers assume about you?
All my family and friends know. It's a little bit. It would be a little bit difficult to keep it from them. And as I get older and older, I care less and less what other people think. I'm just kind of myself, you know. So it's kind of like Helen was saying, right? Like, my sexuality and who I sleep with is not my entire personality, right? Like, it's such a small part, right, of what I do. Like I don't go around being, I'm construction worker Nate, or I'm video gamer Nate, right? Like you don't walk into a room and be like, hey everybody, I play video games. Yep,
Right.
I play video games. That's what I do, right? It's just a part of what makes you who you are. So it's making it more normal is important for sure.
Sure. Well, I suppose I'll go ahead and throw in here as I believe the only non-cis person at the table that gender is different from orientation in these kinds of spaces, because when it comes to orientation, people do tend to make assumptions, whereas your gender is very much expressed and in certain ways on display, but can also be like really misread in those ways. Like I don't choose to use they, them pronouns, and perhaps I should. I think of myself as like cis-ish, and he, him suits me. And I like being a he, him. It lines up with my identity, but it also comes attached with a bunch of assumptions, not just about, toxic masculinity or what a he has to be, but a lot of assumptions with my partner, with myself, with people close to me, sort of forgetting about some of those like more genderqueer aspects of my identity. And then you throw in, girly hair and a girly name and painted fingernails, and people get really thrown for a loop. So it can be kind of agonizing, honestly, just navigating like basic coffee pickup type interactions and that kind of stuff. Do y'all see that on your end of things? When you call to make a dinner reservation and people assume that you are with a different type of partner or that kind of thing?
I know that I don't very much, just because, again, like it's just, I think it's a little, because I present very feminine and I present very cis, that people just automatically go into like, okay, that's a straight person. And I am in a relationship with a cis male. So people just are like, okay, that's the way it is and stuff. So, I don't deal so much with the trying to people with making those assumptions. If I was in the past, when I was younger and I was in relationships with women, that natural tendency, the natural tendency was that you are still cis, you are still straight. And it's just like, well, no, I'm, I've had a girlfriend before and stuff like that. And that can get a little bit frustrating because you have to correct people, and that can get a little bit annoying, and because you're just like, please stop thinking of, certain people just one way just by their presentation. I can imagine that can get really, really frustrating, for certain people to have to constantly correct.
Sure. Yeah, no, I kind of appreciate the fact that the three of us are doing this show, because we do cover so much ground in terms of types of relationships and orientations, and also the assumptions that people make about folks like us, whatever the hell that even actually means.
Right. And I also and I have to imagine like I have a child that is queer and bi, a non-binary child that is also bisexual. And that has to be, it's like, is that even allowed? Can you do that? Because they're, because it's all about, and also that's the sort of thing, like when you're talking about gender and how you present and stuff, people will tend to think like trans and non-binary people must be queer in a certain way as their sexuality, that they're, that they must be poly or pan or whatever, and that's not always the case, but because of these ideas that people have brought on, and these perceptions that they have, they automatically start making certain assumptions about people, if you're like a cis man, but you dress a little bit more feminine, like you were saying, Christy, or like Nate presents more masculine, people will make certain assumptions about you that you're kind of like no, please don't do that. But because just the way that our society and those social cues have been taught to us.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sincere in asking the question, but I do wonder, or I hesitate maybe thinking that we should have a more like fixed system of signaling people, right? Like I'm not necessarily advocating for bringing back like the one earring on the gay ear or anything quite like that. But
is that ever really a thing though?
I mean, no.
It was in the 90s. I remember that.
It was
for a small
90s,
group of people in the 90s, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, when I got my ear pierced, I had to be very mindful to double and triple check that I got it on the straight ear, only to, lo and behold, maybe not. But yeah, none of these things are set in stone. So maybe that's a reason to not broadcast them in these ways. I mean, I don't know. What do y'all think? Is it vital? Is it useful even to maybe signal in these ways, or should people be more sophisticated than that?
I think it's more important to break down these perceptions that people who are outside of the community tend to have. And like people like you and people like me are helping people outside the community to realize that it's not just a binary thing. Like you were saying, I have a female name and hair polish and long hair and whatnot, but it helps to educate people that, the way people feel about their gender isn't just one or the other, right? Like it's a spectrum and it's a dial. So providing examples of people who buck the trend, I think is really, really important in helping to normalize queer culture.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but then I have to wonder about folks like Helen and to a certain extent myself that are operating or living a lifestyle that is within like the default that then are kind of overlooked in these ways and perhaps uninvited to queer spaces. Is that fair to say, Helen? Has that been your experience at all?
Not so much now, but definitely when I was younger,
Sure.
especially in the 90s and the early 2000s, when the queer community was really trying to gain rights and come out of the closet and to be accepted and stuff like that. Being bisexual, it was kind of weird. I was treated kind of coldly in the queer community, because I've had lesbians be like, I have no interest in dating a bi person, just because of that
sort
fear.
of that gold star philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. Or the idea that like, oh, eventually I would want to be with a man, right. Like I couldn't be in a committed relationship and that kind of thing. These old assumptions about people that are bi and pan, and that, and how we navigate our relationships and things like that. I remember that happening. I feel that like, if I was going to enter a queer relationship now, I think that it would be a lot easier because people now have a better understanding of sexuality, how it expresses itself. Some people are geared toward monogamy, some people are poly, some people are poly light, all these different things. So, it's now that there's so much more education out there and people saying that, sexuality and gender comes in so many different shades that, it would probably be easier for me than when it was when I was younger, and that's been a really positive thing too. And also too, like, let's, we can tell the normies that like, hey, that, hey, that interest that you have in someone of the same sex as you, you don't have to hide that anymore. You can talk about your fantasies. You can talk about the things that you desire and not feel ashamed of it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, y'all are both bi and a little bit older than me. Would you say that notion of bi just being like one stop on the gay train or whatever, is that going away? Is that better now than it was?
In my opinion, it is still a big problem in the gay community. Like there's a lot of guys who won't date bi guys. It's gay or GTFO. And I experienced that back when I was in my 20s. I still know younger folks and people in the community that get that now. So I hope that it's getting better. I've been out of the game for quite some time, but from what I hear from folks who are still, on the dating scene, it is still a problem.
Sure. Well, I know we have at least one caller that's been waiting for us the whole time we've been having this conversation. So I'm going to let Nate get that pulled up. But I'd really love to hear from both of you just how you respond to people who believe that passing is a privilege. I should acknowledge we've been talking, the three of us, this whole time without necessarily acknowledging that it can be easier to pass, like as a cis presenting man who is dating a cis presenting woman. There are certainly situations where I wouldn't experience the same discrimination as if I was with a man or something like that. But I don't know. What is y'all's experience? How do you feel about that notion of passing as privilege?
For me, I definitely feel a little bit, because yes, it can make things a little bit easier, but there's also this feeling almost like imposter syndrome, I am not straight, and the fact that I have this identity that I want to express, but because people make assumptions and stuff like that, and unless I feel like sharing, I can kind of not just pretend yep, I'm completely straight, hetero relationship. Yep. Fine. I passed the straight test. Yay for me. But it can get really, but it makes you uncomfortable. There's a part of me that there's a part of me that I'm not showing, and I can understand, especially in the bi community, of people that default to a straight relationship because of pressure. They might feel that, especially if you have family and friends that don't understand what bisexuality isn't, they're prejudiced or whatever. They make assumptions that you will fall into those spaces just because it's easier to navigate. But there's a part of you that's always am I being really true to myself? Is this who I really am? And it's sometimes it can be a little bit disheartening in that way.
Sure. And we'll talk more about this, but I guess I want to highlight for the audience, just myself as a therapist and myself as somebody in that situation, that when you pass well enough for long enough, you can mask so well that you start to forget your own identity. And, Helen, you were talking about this sort of nagging feeling that you don't necessarily fit in, or that this isn't necessarily you. And I hear that and I feel that, but I also know that it can be really easy to kind of forget about those pieces of yourself. And then you look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, well, why did I do that? Oh, right. Because I'm queer. Right. Yeah.
Right.
There was that whole thing in high school. Yeah. I remember that was a thing. And it can kind of mask your identity from yourself even. But Nate, you go ahead.
Yeah, no, that really hits home for me as somebody who didn't come out until my 20s, because it was just easier to pass, and it was just easier not to confront the difficulties that gay people go through, and people on the spectrum go through. And I think that it kind of is a bit of a privilege to be able to pass and not have to confront that. I've never had to go through something like what a trans person must go through, right? When they're trying to pass as their preferred gender. That is so, I have so much respect for what they must go through, that in these last few years I've kind of felt like I need to wear that more, and I need to be more of an ambassador for the queer community. So what I did a few years ago is I started wearing a hot pink hard hat to work, just so that everybody would know.
You've been bragging about it. I'm glad we finally get to see it.
Oh yeah, no, it's real, bro. I wear that all the time, and it comes up in conversation, and it kind of, I get a few looks, I get a few dirty looks, but I get a lot of chuckles. And I actually, for working in an industry that is male dominated and is characterized by people that you might think might not really be allies to the LGBTQ community, I get so much more pats on the back and friendliness and, hey, that's cool, man, and blah, 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 than you might think. I think it really is. I think we really are moving forward as a society. That gives me hope.
Hey, that's great to hear.